Patrick,
Hey Roger, how you doing?
fantastic, Pat. Great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Yeah, so Patrick, so strange to kind of be connecting with you again. I mean, we first connected, when was it? Way back in like 2014, maybe, or even earlier, perhaps.
Even earlier, I think, yeah, we knew each other, but we hadn't really connected, if that made sense. And then through diving, we sort of got united through diving. I think that's how it started. You reached out to me, interested in getting some more experience in deep water, and I think that's how it started.
Yeah, I remember that. I was based up in Durban at the time and was very keen to develop my diving skills. And going deep obviously gives you, it's such an extreme kind of environment, which means that it's a bit like racing driving, right? If you can drive a car that fast, you can drive a normal car even better. So that was a big motivation for me. And I think it was all about coelacanths and wrecks at the time.
It's a funny story. I've been teaching diving and trying to build my niche in diving. And I actually saw an article written about a fish that somebody had found, and I thought, oh, that was pretty cool. And I was doing one of my very early tech dives. I was on a dive, and I saw this fish, this ray, that I'd never seen before. And I didn't manage to get a photo of it. I didn't have a camera, and it was at about 45 meters. And I contacted Dennis King, who writes books about fish, and I described it to Dennis, and Dennis was, "Oh wow, that's incredible! You're one of very few people to have seen that alive. It's called the Addisoni Electrolux, or the ornate sleeper ray, and it was found by Mark Addison, who was famous for some of the shark diving he was doing." And I sat back after that conversation with Dennis, and I thought to myself, I want to find a fish. I want to find a fish and have it named after me. And that's how my journey into deep diving started, was because I wanted to find a fish. And doing the research is those fish that haven't been named yet are probably at the deeper depths. And so that's how I got into deep diving, was in search of a fish to be named after me. A bit vain, maybe, but hey, who doesn't want a fish named after them? and and you, Roger, how was you getting into deep diving an extension of what you were doing? Did you feel that to give you more scope as a underwater cinematographer, did you need to go deeper, or was it just from a personal sort of skill you wanted to develop?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it was very much driven by a desire similar to you, to get access to stories that are in the deep because those stories haven't been told. So, I've always looked to try and find some kind of competitive advantage, either through, leveraging off my physicality or my spearfishing background or some kind of speciality. So that was very much at the back of my mind. And then in the front of it was, you know, I just love the skill and the challenge and there's a lot at stake, right? Like when it's like the faster you go in a car, the deeper you go. One small error is way more significant. So I think it was really around those two things. And yeah, I reached out to you. You had the dive center in at Ushaka.
Yeah, that's right. And I suppose in those early days, I was trying to build a niche for myself. As you say, you need that competitive edge. You need something that makes you different to everybody else. And that's what I wanted to do, and you're right about, it's like, how when I was teaching tech diving, is if you talk about recreational diving, you're standing on a quiet road in the middle of a desert, and there is a car coming towards you, and you've got plenty of time to sort of think about, okay, there's something going wrong, what can I do? Yet when you're at 100 meters, it's like standing on the motorway, and there are cars coming at you at 70 miles an hour, and you've got to think quick. And the problem is at depth, problems escalate really quickly. And I suppose that's what's brought us to where we are here now, is we've learned those lessons at depth and how to deal with them. And we're going to talk about that in sort of later episodes, but the lessons that we've learned at depth translate to real life. There's building up for the dive. You've got to practice, be prepared, drill, know what you're doing. Then something can happen on the dive, and what I've learned, can I apply to it, or what do I need? And there's that saying in tech diving is it's team diving. One brain is better than or three brains are better than one brain. What I don't know, somebody else might know. So that's what I was trying to do, is get that knowledge and get that niche and get that competitive edge over everybody else. And I suppose that's probably what brought us together, is that sort of like mindset brought us together.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, as you say, we can sort of unpack a lot of that later on, and one or two things, and certainly in future episodes. But I think now what's really interesting is that our paths have crossed again, because we're both almost pursuing a similar kind of venture, which is really engaging with the creator economy and looking to, take ownership of our own creative output and take that directly to market. So maybe just some thoughts. I mean, I've been very inspired by what you've been doing on LinkedIn, for example, but maybe just some thoughts on, pressure tested, the impetus behind it, and what, your ambition for this podcast that we're going to host together.
You talked about my LinkedIn journey, and I suppose that was sort of the catalyst to where we are today. Is exactly 60 days ago, I had listened to a podcast by Stephen Bartlett, which was his behind the scenes podcast, and this podcast was Quit Your Job in 90 Days. And I've listened to podcasts and I take it in, but I've never acted or reacted to a podcast. And I was sat there in front of my computer listening to this podcast, and it felt as if he was speaking to me personally. And I sat there and I took out a piece of paper, and the piece of paper's here on my desk. I'll dig it up now. And I drew myself a diagram of, here's me in the center, and where do I want to be and where do I want to go? And that day, I started my very first LinkedIn post. And as you say, is I have so many stories to tell about the deep exploration and searching for wrecks and diving at extreme depth and how I could share those stories. And I never had a platform to share those stories before. I always thought to myself, oh, it's a bit cringe, writing a post on LinkedIn or writing a post on Facebook, because you're really exposing yourself and your soul and your innermost thoughts and feelings with everybody out there. But as Stephen Bartlett said in that thing, is you will be embarrassed. You will think, whoa, what am I doing here? Oh, I'm a bit scared to press, enter and post. And 60 days in, it's a wonderful feeling of being able to share those stories, share what I've learned on a platform. And I suppose that's what we're trying to achieve here is, when we were talking about it, is you contacted me because you'd seen these stories on LinkedIn and they resonated with you. And you'd also had a similar sort of journey is how do I share what I know with everybody out there? And so it was almost a coming together, as I'd started my path and you'd started your path. And our paths crossed and we realized there's a synergy here, and we can draw it back to what we both know is those decisions you have to make under pressure. They can be life changing and life altering. And I think you were coming on sort of a similar sort of trajectory when we crossed paths.
Yeah, very much, Pat. I mean, I've been, the digitization component has been like a fourth leg of my business strategy for a long time. I've been concentrating primarily on being an underwater DOP or cinematographer, and there was just so much work that it was so difficult to carve out the time to really, start to build the courses and the things that I've always wanted to do. But earlier this year, I was able to, launch the first program. And it's just, it's been an incredible journey of self-realization. And it's just so wonderful to be connecting with people at scale, right? Because that's the beauty of the digital economy, is that you write one post, if you send a letter to someone, only they can read it. But if you write something that resonates and has value and you post it online in your digital garden, if you want to call it that, it can be read by so many people and valued by so many people. So it definitely demands a different way of thinking. And as you said earlier, you have to open yourself up, because I think people relate to that. If it's open and it's honest, the authenticity of it is so important, especially in the age of AI now, and I think it's going to become even more important. So that's when I think you were toying with things, and I just thought, why don't we let's do something together? Because sometimes when you're venturing into the unknown, it is nice to hold someone's hand, as it were.
And what was great is I think one of the stories I shared, and it's definitely a longer story to be told in another episode, but I shared that story of the rule of threes. We both as technical divers had that mantra of, if three things go wrong, then there's this greater power. There's something telling us stop. And you and I experienced that three things went wrong. Your rebreather wouldn't start up in the morning. The gas, which we had religiously checked and rechecked and triple checked the night before, suddenly was way off. And then the third thing was we couldn't hook the wreck. And we looked at each other, and you said to me, Pat, that's three things. And I'm like, Roger, let's call the dive. And when we got back to the dive center and you were taking your kit apart, you literally held up your scrubber and showed me the O-ring, which had folded up and rolled up. And if Roger had done that dive to 105 meters with that rolled up O-ring, he would have been breathing in unscrubbed air. He would have been breathing in carbon dioxide, would have gone unconscious, and would have died. And it's such a powerful story, and we'll delve more into it. But like you say, I shared that story online on LinkedIn, and a vet in New Zealand contacted me and said, "Thank you. I went in to do a procedure with a cat, and I just read your story that morning, and the rule of three was foremost in my mind, and I stopped doing what I was doing because there were three strikes." And when she went back and analyzed it, there was so much potential of things that could have gone wrong, which had previously gone wrong because she had ignored the signs. And so that story was almost the bonding of us coming together, saying, wow, we can share these experiences with people. We can tell people what we've experienced, and hopefully it will affect somebody's life for the positive in the future. And like you say, is if I write a letter and put it in somebody's postbox, it can only possibly affect that one person. But what we're trying to achieve here is just through our stories and storytelling, maybe we can affect one person's life that changes things completely. And that's what's happened to me on this journey is by chance I watched the podcast, and suddenly here I am 60 days later. My life has done a complete 180-degree turn. I've been contacted and reached out and spoken with people I would never have ever spoken to, people I didn't know exist and people didn't know I existed. And we formed new relationships, new opportunities, and suddenly my world has opened up. And I think that was the excitement of what we wanted to share in this podcast.
So if I was to say to you, what job? I mean, you've kind of said it already, but what job is this? Is pressure tested going to do? What job is it going to do for people? What would your answer be?
I think we want to share our real life stories that are in an extreme environment, which is at depth, deep under the ocean surface, and how those translate to your life and everyday living. And I suppose the job of this podcast is, if somebody can get a meaningful message from that and change their life, change their direction, then we've achieved what we're trying to set out. It's real stories formed under pressure. And I suppose it's, you read all those stories as, the coal under pressure becomes a diamond. But you have to understand that process to become a diamond. So how you react under pressure is, I think, what we're trying to achieve here is, there's this pressure, let's forge you so you're better for the pressure. And I think that's what I'm hoping to achieve is that type of story.
Okay, great.
And for
Yeah,
you,
I think
Roger?
I think that's very much that would very much be my ambition with the podcast. And I think also it's a learning journey, right? Because while we have proven ourselves under pressure in certain situations, I mean, I know for sure that I have definitely crumbled in other kind of pressure situations, and aspire not to do so in the future. So for me, this is also a great opportunity to, hopefully we'll get we'll be able to get some really interesting people on the show as well, who have an expertise in pressure, maybe in dealing with pressure in other environments, or academics who studied it. And in that way, we can enhance and flesh out, our core understanding of what it is, and along the way, take people with us as well. Because pressure is just everywhere, isn't it? I mean, it's like being human. To be human is to be under pressure. So it's actually a wonderful kind of lens to look at things through.
And when we were discussing this and planning this, I said to you, "It's like, how do we start? Do we need to practice?" And you said to me, "Let's practice in public." And that's exactly what we're doing. This is quite daunting. I'll be honest. This is quite daunting, sitting here creating this with Roger. First of all, is I'm doing this with Roger, and that has its own pressure for me. But here I am doing something I've never done in my life before, doing a podcast. And I was saying to Roger, should we not practice? Should we not script it? Should we not? And Roger's like, we're going to do this. And if we do it 100 times or 1,000 times, we're going to hit on the formula. Let's practice in public. And I suppose that's probably our first message to everybody is take that first step. Don't be afraid. This is me and this is Roger taking this first step. And, it's hopefully somebody learns something from that, which is our goal. But hey, if we're having fun doing it and sharing our stories, I mean, we've got some amazing stories. You've got some amazing stories. We've done things that other people haven't possibly done. And let's go and practice in public and see how that journey ends up.
Oh, great, Patrick. I mean, I think that frames it pretty well, and we'll refine it over time. But I think that for me is a great sort of start. We know what we're trying to do. So let's, we're going to keep these generally around about 40, 50 minutes or so. So why do we jump into a situation? I mean, why don't you start with, sharing one or two scenarios where, you were faced with something that really put you, into the pressure grinder?
I suppose one of the stories that sort of, would resonate with a lot of people is I've been doing a lot of tech diving and a lot of deep diving, and for those people who aren't divers, and this isn't a podcast about diving. It's what we've learned from diving that we can relate to stories. But this story is probably the one that sort of resonates most deeply with me. And one of the reasons that we wanted to do these podcasts is I'd been doing a lot of deep extreme diving. When I say a lot, is I was diving almost every day. I went and looked at my logbook, and sometimes I would in the space of a month I'd do 20 dives deeper than 60 meters in a month, and that's real hectic diving. And diving off Durban, the conditions are extreme. You can have strong currents. It's one of Africa's busiest harbors. There's ships of all shapes and sizes going over the top of you. And we were then doing exploration as well. And on this particular dive, I had a really experienced group of divers with me. They were all divers who'd done a lot of diving with me, deep diving and independently. And we were diving a wreck that I discovered, the Istar wreck, and that's at 75 meters. And we got to the end of our planned bottom time, and everybody was there. There was 5 of us on the dive, so myself plus four other divers. And at that stage, these were all top technical divers in South Africa, top recreational technical divers. And I said, I'm going to go and unhook the anchor line from the wreck. And I swam down and unhooked, and it had got dropped sort of through a hole in the side of the wreck. And I got the anchor up, and I just assumed everyone was behind me watching me. And when I turned around and looked up, I'm like, oh, the buggers, they've already started their ascent. And they were probably about 15 meters above me, which doesn't sound like a lot. But when the visibility is only 10 to 15 meters and you're at 75 meters, it's far. And you don't just have, I'm going to travel 75 minutes. You can't just go straight to the surface. In technical diving, you've got to do decompression stops. So although I'm only 75 meters from the surface, I'm in effect, 2 or 3 hours from the surface because you've got to do all these staged decompression stops. And so we're, we're going up, and I'm sort of trying to catch them up, if that makes sense. And they were just sort of on the edge of my visibility, and I got to 60 meters, and I needed to do a gas change. The back gas I was breathing, I needed to go into travel gas. I was diving on open circuit, and I grabbed the regulator and put it into my mouth and exhaled, which was fine. And when I inhaled water, a breath of water. And the frightening thing is you're not expecting that. You're expecting clean, fresh air to come into your mouth. And I breathed in water. I was coughing and spluttering. I had my light, and I was flashing my light, trying to attract the attention of the other guys. And they just carried on. And so there I was at 60 meters, sort of drowning in silence. Like, what do I do? And so I grabbed, regulator in my mouth, grabbed my back gas again, breathed in, coughing and spluttering. And the plan was I needed to breathe that gas. And so, I knew what to do, as I'd practiced the scenario before and drilled it and drilled it and drilled it in the pool. And I had a way of, so I unscrewed the faulty reg, put on a spare second stage, exhaled, breathed, and carried on. And I basically did that dive alone, because doing all of that, they were sort of always 1 or 2 stops ahead of me. And when we got to the boat, I was really angry, and I sort of said to them, "What the hell were you guys doing? Did you not see me flashing my light?" And they all looked at me sort of like laughing and like, "Oh, but Pat, it was you, you don't have any problems. And we thought it was you winding your reel up, and that's why the light was flashing. We didn't expect you to have a problem." And I think that is the lessons there is you have team leaders and you have top managers who everybody expects them to have the answer. Everyone expects them not to have any problems. But you need somebody to check in on that person. You need somebody to say, "Are you okay?" And not expect that person to be perfect or never have a problem. And that was the lesson I learned from that day, is everybody stays together and we check on each other. You cannot, just because that person's always okay and always doing it right, you can't expect that person to always get it right. Sorry, excuse me. And I think that was the lessons I learned there, is quite often you have senior managers who are silently screaming for help, but they don't know how to ask for help, and nobody checks in if they do need help. And so that was probably one of the biggest lessons myself and the team learned is we all need to check in on each other. We all need to ask, "Are you okay? Is everything okay?" And so that was a great lesson that I learned, and I think the team learned, and it's a lesson that I share elsewhere.
Yeah, I think a great corollary to that from my corporate background is, I can't remember exactly where there was the GSB, but I remember this concept of managing up. The notion that you're not only responsible for those below you in terms of seniority, let's say, and I don't know if this is the case in the military, because I know you've got a background in the military, but you've also got to manage up. You've got to be aware that, as you say, your boss or whoever that might be, they're not perfect. They've got their own blind spots. They've got their own issues. And it's pointless just sitting there complaining about their behavior, but you've actually, you've got to manage up. You've got to influence. I mean, it might even be Peter Drucker. But it's such a good point. You just assume that person's bulletproof. Just on a small technical note, how did you actually, what was the drill, just out of interest? As a diver, obviously I have an interest in that, but how did you switch that out?
We don't leave anybody behind. We stay together as a group. We're only as fast as the slowest diver. So they assumed that I would catch them up. But, if you wait 30 seconds or a minute while you're solving a problem at 70 meters, 60 meters, it's exponentially getting bigger because they're getting further away from you. And it's quite daunting when you're alone in the dark at 60 meters and your team is above you, and there's a current going. And within a short time, you get separated from that group. And I got separated from that group. I did the rest of that dive alone. And the assumption was you're okay. So what I did is that next weekend, we generally dive together as a weekend. That weekend, we did a shallow dive and we practiced those drills. The five of us all facing each other, all signaling what we were going to do, watching everybody, checking everybody. And I suppose that it was a bit of complacency, because we'd been diving together so often, we all sort of thought we knew what each other was doing. And that's how, the complacency creeps in. Is like, oh, Patrick knows what he's doing. He'll be fine. But what if I wasn't fine? What if I needed to hold on to somebody and say, I need your help? What if I'd had a second failure or a third failure, which is entirely possible. So that next weekend, we did a shallow dive and we practiced the drills. We practiced the gas switches. We practiced problem scenarios, and it made us better for it. But it needed that incident to spark the change in us and to challenge what we were doing, because it was very easy. Is when you first off start, you have these sort of strict rules and protocols, and you should be sticking to them. But it's very simple to become complacent and allow these small little changes to happen, that eventually when you're aligned as a team, suddenly you're not aligned as a team and you're drifting apart. And it's okay, I can still see you, but the alignment's gone, and before you know it, you're not aligned anymore, and you don't have that team that's got your back. You don't have the common goal and the common vision. And so it was coming back to basics and repracticing and redefining what we were doing. And from that day on, we set an example as to how it should be done. And it needed that incident to remind us of that. So, yeah. And for you, Roger, what sort of would be a sort of a defining moment or a dive or something under pressure that sort of gave you this realization of what you could accomplish?
Well, it's a double-edged one in the sense that, yeah, let me talk you through it, and then you'll get a sense of it. But excuse me, when I originally started off very much as a free diver, as a spear fisherman and a free diver. That was my real passion and obsession when I was at university. Dived really hard, competed for provincially and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I remember when I joined sort of corporate, I started doing some competition free diving, and I was training with a South African called Bevan Dure, who incredible diver. I think he did, I think his best was like a 90, constant weight. This was back in 2005. So he was a really accomplished
That was
diver.
really good. Yeah.
Really good. I mean, he was doing, I think he swam through the Blue Arch at Dahab. Phenomenal athlete. So we were doing some training together at the Blue Hole, just outside Cape Town, which goes down to 45 meters. And, Bevan was doing literally 2-minute statics. He was swimming down to 45 meters, doing a 2-minute static on the bottom, and then swimming up.
And this is in the quarry in Cape Town.
Correct.
The Blue Rock.
Sorry. Yeah, quarry, Blue Hole. So anyway, the plan was for me to attempt 45-meter no fins. So that means you swim down and you swim back up. And it's black, right? So, you get down to...
I've been to the bottom of that quarry. Sometimes I would close my eyes because I could see more with my eyes closed, my eyes open. So, yeah.
Yeah, so we had torches attached and, breathing up, myself and Bevan. And there was a protocol, he knew how long I would take, and then he would come down and basically be there. So one of the rules of no fins is that you're not allowed to touch the rope, or you get disqualified. So this was kind of foremost in my mind. Did a good breathe up. I mean, we'd done a few dives already. I did a good breathe up and I went down and, did some big strokes and then basically just dropped. And I was feeling really strong, got to the bottom, turned around, kind of pushed off the bottom. And then on the very first frog kick, I tore my groin. So my entire groin just tore. And I remember thinking, that's it, I'm dead. I'll never make it to the surface. And then I just kind of thought, you know what, Bevan's going to come down. Like, I'm sure I can get to 15 meters or thereabouts or 10 meters. And then if I black out, Bevan will be there. I have a lot of confidence in him and he'll sort me out. And I just calmly swam, using your arms. So your arms actually give you a huge amount of propulsion, more so than your legs. And I went up and I saw the lights and then I saw Bevan coming through and he was watching me, and then I hit the surface, took a hook breath, and I was fine. I made it. So I just so clearly remember that moment of, feeling a tear, and then that wanting to panic, but then just that's not going to help in this situation. Like, clearly it's not. And I mean, so much of what you do
while you're panicking. So
with freediving is calming yourself down. But the crazy thing is, Patrick, and this talks to, again, a lack of mental preparation and scenario planning. I didn't pull myself up on the rope.
the solution was right there in front of you, so obvious, but you become so focused on what you think the solution is.
So, I mean, whether that would have been more efficient, I mean, that obviously I'm not 100% sure, but, it was right there in front of me. I was staring at it the whole swim up, but I would not touch that rope because in my mind,
the rule was you couldn't touch the rope.
The rule is you can't touch the rope, So that's always, really stuck with me. And the lessons there are, really around proper, scenario planning. What happens if this goes wrong, or what do you do in this kind of situation? Because that, if I'd pre-visualized that, it could have made the difference between losing it or not losing it.
You know what, Roger? I think it's something that we can talk about. Is if I was doing a deep extreme dive, that night before I visualize, or the night before I visualize the entire dive, from waking up in the morning, what I'm going to have breakfast, the drive into the dive center or wherever, the kitting up, the drive out on the boat, what I'm going to do every step of the way, all the way back up. And so the first thing I do is I visualize my perfect day on that dive. Then the second and third and fourth time I visualize it as what could go wrong, what are the problems. And I think, that's something we can discuss, because it's really important. Is if you had visualized what if I have these problems, you've already thought of what the solution is, then suddenly when you're at 45 meters, your lungs are burning. You don't have to waste that additional time thinking, what are my solutions? And to that problem, as we said rightly, you're on the freeway or the motorway, and those cars are coming at 120 kilometers an hour or 80 miles an hour. You don't have much time to think. But if you've already visualized that problem and visualized the solutions to those problems, then you're going to react far quicker and come up with the right thing. Oh, sure, but my legs sore, I can't swim up. We didn't even have fins. Maybe if I pull myself up on the rope, I might go up faster, or even just to kick start myself so I get a bit of momentum. So, like you say, that visualization is really important. And I suppose,
just on that, I was actually reading that Dr. Joe Dispenza book, The Becoming Supernatural, and he cites in there an example, scientific study they did where the one test group had to visualize. They just had to visualize doing something, versus the other group. And I can't remember the exact scenario, but the ones that were visualizing were actually creating the mental pathways, physical pathways. So, I think it's something we definitely need to explore in greater detail on this podcast. And also, how do you take that? It's one thing when you're doing something that is relatively defined, right? Like a dive, but how do you take that same thing into a situation that's much more variable, where there's more change elements potentially coming at you? Because that's what a lot of us face in this, what I call the heavy lifting of life. It's messy. It's kids suddenly got this problem, and that's a problem, and so it would be very interesting to see how one can visualize for chaos, a greater level of chaos, and take those learnings across.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so exciting about this is I don't say you and I both have all the answers, but together we have a lot of experience and insight into problem solving. And you know, a dive isn't just the dive. You know, if I think of some of the deep dives we did together, our goal was to dive, you know, and look for coelacanths at 150 meters. But we had spent a week building up to that dive. Prior to that, we'd spent weeks practicing for the build up for the main event. And so there's a lot of process. You know, people see a free diver, you know, diving 120 meters and getting a world record. But that world record didn't happen on that day. There's maybe a lifetime of preparation that got to that single moment in time. And I suppose that's what we're trying to share is, you know, for us to be sitting here practicing in public today, this hasn't just happened by you and I chance meeting and saying, hey, let's do a podcast. You know, we have a whole lifetime of experiences that have brought us to where we are now. And I think that's the exciting thing about it is although we've have two different paths in our lives, we have the same foundation that led us to the paths we've chosen. So I'm really excited about this. The more I'm sitting here talking about it, actually, the more exciting I'm getting about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you know the one thing that I enjoy so much about, you know, is a lot of, I mean, I really try and curate who I follow, right, on social media, because, you know, the you know, doom scrolling and getting sucked into that is a real thing, right? So like, I think it's really, really important that you do that. But, you know, so many of the people that I follow, the real benefit is they're not necessarily telling me things I don't know, but they're repeating things to me that I know that I should be applying in my life. And I think that's, you know, that's also where something I'd really like to achieve in this is not only for, because we'll benefit from it, right, in terms of, you know, repeating the conversations, and but hopefully people that watch the podcast as well can benefit from just those reminders again, you know, of, you know, when you're, because it, you know, as we discussed the other day, it can often be the greatest pressure can come from your partner, right? Like diving with great white sharks, that's easy, man. But like, you know, you get into a really tough, you know,
My wife's going to watch this. I'll be careful what I say.
you know,
I won't liken her. I won't liken Sabrina to a great white shark.
yeah. Well, I mean, they are perfectly evolved, right?
True.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's something that's also very interesting for me is you know, pressure comes in so many forms, and also, you know, pressure compounds. You know, if you're on a dive and you having issues back home, you know, that's a real problem. I mean, I remember reading, you know, I've always been fascinated by the Navy SEALs, obviously, because they just, you know, supremely trained. And I remember, I don't know exactly where, but just pretty sure that that's something that they talk about, like before they deploy. You know, do you have any issues at home? Because if one of those team members' mind is back home trying to deal with some kind of issue, you know, it could be their kid could be sick, or that's going to affect his or her performance in the context of that team. You know, it fundamentally affects the teamwork, and I've certainly seen that on shoots, because, you know, we work in small teams, right? So that's what I love about being an ocean cinematographer, wildlife cinematographer, is that unlike in corporate, which, you know, I've spent a lot of time in corporate where that, you know, you work in massive organizations. It might be a small executive team, but it's systemically it's different. But with small teams, you know, it's very, very clear when if someone lets you down, it can have massive consequences, right, on the outcome of the shoot or whatever. So had many instances where one, you know, you've had to actually, you know, someone's got a personal crisis, and you've got to actually create the right trust for them so that they can talk about things and feel heard, and, you know, and you almost need to carry them, right, in the context of that team, because you just can't expect them to perform at their best.
You know, you say that. I actually read. I read yesterday. It was a post somebody shared about Tom Hanks, and he was on. I think it was on the set of Castaway, on that movie, and there was one of the lead cameraman who wasn't performing well. He wasn't doing what he was meant to be doing, and somebody asked him, you know, are you okay? And he's like, no, I'm not. I'm just about to lose my house, and it's just about to be repossessed and what have you. And Tom Hanks overheard that story, and he got his production company to go and pay the arrears rent. And uh, um, the next day or the next few days, that cameraman was completely changed, completely different person, became creative and became integral and became a real part of the production. Whereas before, he was thinking, I'm about to lose my house, about to lose my job. And he had the courage to speak up about it. And I think, us as big burly men, sometimes we don't have the courage to speak up about the things that are facing us and the challenges that we're facing. I think, as a stereotypical South African male, we we're big and butch and burly, but I think part of the journey that I'm on in this last 60 days is the opening up, is sharing stories and talking and becoming vulnerable, and that vulnerability actually gives you strength, it gives you power, and even in the last 60 days, my relationship with Sabrina has changed. It's evolved to something better because of what I'm doing on LinkedIn. And I suppose these are stories that we want to talk about. Is there are defining moments in your life which you can look back and say that was life changing. But to your point, there is also everyday life and the challenges and the pressure you've got to deal with every single day. And I'm hopeful that these conversations, as they evolve, I've learned something today. I think you've learned something today, and hopefully, people enjoy what we're talking about and join us on this journey, and we can help them, forge new frontiers and become better them through these stories.
Yeah,
I'm
definitely,
excited.
Patrick. And I mean, I love doing things well. I don't always do things well, but I mean, certainly, and that's what I love doing when I work, diving with you. I just, you know what I mean. I could just sense that you had applied yourself to the task, and I felt safe, and I felt in good hands, and I was also being stretched. So yeah, I think we should definitely aspire. I mean, what this is now compared to where it needs to be in after 100
You,
podcasts.
you, you know, and I think people have seen it. There's that sort of iconic video of there's this race, 100-meter race, and it's back from maybe the 1970s or something like this. And these guys these athletes are sprinting at top speed, and there's a cameraman running next to them with the camera, and he's
Yeah,
in line with, I don't know if you've ever seen that clip,
I have.
and
Yeah.
he's in line with these top sprinters. And I thought of that, we were diving in Jessa Canyon, and it was a screaming current. I mean, my mask was vibrating on my face, and the bubbles were going behind me, and I was struggling to get to the edge of the
And that
canyon.
was that was at almost 140 meters, remember, because we were
And
deep
you
in
were
the
there
pool.
off to the side, filming me. I was struggling to get, a bit of cover and get over the edge of this as the current was coming up over this thing. And there you were, filming me from this angle and that angle and over the top and behind. And afterwards when I watched the footage, I just thought to myself, shit, I was on my journey, yet you were on the same journey as me with a big camera in your hand, trying to get all these angles. So yeah, it's we may be on in the same boat, but we're in different oceans sometimes, or we're in the same ocean in different boats. Um, yeah, they're incredible stories that we can share. And we've had some good times, and we even I remember when we were diving looking for the coelacanths in Sudwana, we spent many an hour discussing the merits of how to make the perfect cup of tea.
Oh, I mean, this is the most important discussion. Right?
There we were having just completed the hectic dive in extreme conditions, and we spent the next hour in the kitchen making a cup of tea and discussing how long it should brew for, and looking at these savages coming in and dunking a tea bag and pulling it out and pouring the milk in and walking off, and we just
Not acceptable.
shook
Poor,
our heads and like,
poor.
how on earth did they make a cup of tea like that? Yeah.
No, great, Patrick. Well, I mean, I think that's I think that's a pretty decent start. I feel like we've kind of worked things out in public. We've got a sense of things, so we can put this out into the world and see what signal we get back. But yeah, I'm very committed to going on this journey with you, and we've got a rough plan, so let's stick to it.
Yeah, and yeah, anybody who's made it to the end, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed it. And Roger, my aim is we'll do this at least once a week, and we'll share some more stories and maybe a little bit more insight into specific stories as opposed to a range of stories and the lessons we learn from them. And as Roger said, it won't be just us. We're hoping to invite people along to share their precious stories with us. And if we can just help one person on this journey, then we sort of achieve what we're hoping to set out to achieve, is practicing in public. It's something I've learned today, and it doesn't feel as bad as I thought it would feel. It didn't feel as awkward as I thought it would feel. So, you just needed to tell me it's okay, Patrick, let's practice in public. And I can tell everybody out there, actually, it is okay. So
Yeah.
thank you, Roger.
No, it's a pleasure. We've done our first podcast, so we can tick that one off. And look forward to next week.
Brilliant.
Awesome.
Cool.
Okay,
Thanks,
Patrick.
Roger.
Thanks for your time.
Cheers.
Chat soon.
Bye.
Cheers.